Hi there, and thank you so much for clicking on this video today. If you're new to this channel, my name is Kaylee and I'm a beauty and fashion photographer based near Sydney, Australia. And over the past decade or so, I have been sharing knowledge on this channel, whether it be for photography, retouching, or business. I love all of these three things combined and I love to chat about them. In today's video, we're going to be delving into a topic which I feel like I've been avoiding for a while. Actually a really long time. I think in terms of the popularity of questions I get asked on a weekly basis, behind the number one question, which is probably what camera equipment do you use, one of the next most popular questions I get asked is how much do you charge as a commercial photographer? So I've always kind of avoided answering this question, and it's for a number of reasons. And I've avoided this question in a way because I think I've been scared to give the wrong information to any person who's asked this question to me. And because it's such a personal and individualized thing, it's been really difficult to actually answer in a more general sense. I also think that we're taught from a really young age not to talk about finances and to be really close-lipped about this kind of stuff. And I do think as a community and as a whole, photographers do tend to be pretty quiet on what they earn and what they're charging. And I completely understand for several reasons, but I do think there's sometimes this fear that some photographers might have that people are just going to like rip their rates or try and undercharge or do something along that line of things. And I think in a way it's pretty irrational to think like that. I think from talking to most people about this topic, I think many of you are just curious to know how much I'm charging or how much other photographers are charging, so you have a benchmark. And I think that that's completely fair and maybe even unfair of us as professional photographers to not provide you with a certain level of information around this topic, because I think it's really difficult when you are first starting out to know how much you need to charge. And I've actually written a mini ebook on how to price your photography, and I think there's lots of useful information in there if you're a beginner to photography and you're looking at starting a business. I think there's a lot of information in there that's quite general and helpful for beginners. Having said that, I don't really go into what I earn, and I think that this is what this video is going to be about. It's going to be setting more of a benchmark for you to work your rates around if you like. It does go without saying though that the rates that I'm going to be talking about that I charge today may not be applicable to you. And to be honest, they're more than likely not going to be applicable to you. These rates are based on a certain level of experience. They are based on the location that I live in. So for example, I live near Sydney, Australia, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, and the beauty and fashion industry in Australia is quite small compared to a lot of other countries around the world. And I tend to work with a lot of brands who may either be startups or they're kind of more of a mid-sized company. And so to get those really larger clients that are really well known in the beauty industry, a lot of them actually hail from overseas. So there's definitely going to be a discrepancy in how much I charge compared to how much you may charge. And you may live in a city such as New York or London. In that case, you might have a much higher chance of getting those larger clients on board at some stage. So it is something to really consider when you're watching this video, and when I talk about my rates, I have a very different situation compared to where you may be at this point in time. Some of you may think that I charge too little. Some of you might think that I really overcharge, and that's completely fine. I think we're all allowed to have our opinions around this, and remembering that my situation could be extremely different to yours. So I really do believe at the end of the day that it's probably not very fair to a lot of you guys if I don't start to be a little bit more transparent with my earnings and with things about this topic, because I do think everyone needs to start somewhere, and it's really nice to know what your potential could be. If you're charging a very minimal amount at the moment, you could potentially be charging a lot more one day. And I think it's really good to have this as a bit of a benchmark out there for those of you who are interested. Another thing to remember is that these rates are a from price, so they do not apply to every client that I have. I have varying clients. Some are much smaller brands, some are much larger. So depending on the usage, depending on other factors, will be really dependent on the final price of any given photo shoot. So that's really something to keep in mind as well. I'm going to be going through my half day and full day rates, and this does not also include usage, as I spoke about before, nor does it include retouching. I charge my retouching separately at a different rate, and I will go through those as well. So without further ado, let's get into my rates. Starting off with my full day photography rate and my half day photography rate. And I'm going to stress that my full day photography rate is the one that I utilize more often and the one that I quote more often. I prefer to quote a lot of my clients a full day rate because you can get a lot more done in a full day, and it avoids going for the lesser rate, which is my half day rate. I've usually found by experience that half day shoots, unless it's a startup, smaller brand, half day shoots don't usually bode too well for bigger clients that want a lot more out of a shooting day. So usually the full day is what I do quote, but my full day rate is $1,600 plus GST. So that is our goods and services tax here in Australia. So that is 10%, which gets added on to the end figure. So that would make my final rate $1,760 for a full day. That is just the photography side of things. That is just me being present on the shoot day and photographing the images. My half day rate I charge at $950 plus GST. So the way I like to adjust my half day rate is having it a bit higher than the half of my full day rate, if that makes sense. So I don't want it to be exactly half of my full day rate because I want to encourage my clients to pick a full day rate. And I do think in terms of planning the shoot in advance, all the emailing, the back and forth, that really comes into extra time that you're still putting into the shoot. And I do think there needs to be a level of compensation for that. So that's why I add on a little bit more to my half day rate. As I said, the full day rate is the primary amount that I do quote to my clients. So those are my day rates for photography. And like I said, some of you might think that that's too little. Some of you might think that that's a lot. But keeping in mind, this is a from price, and this does not apply to every client that I have. It really is going to be depending on what the client wants in a day and who the client is. So it's really going to be dependent on those factors as well. Now moving on to my retouching rates. Now this can be a little bit different depending on the style of image I'm retouching. So I could be retouching beauty photography, in which case I charge $50 per photo for beauty retouching. That is also plus GST, so that figure needs to be added on to that amount. I came to this conclusion to pay $50 per image for beauty retouching because 9 times out of 10, I can usually retouch a beauty image for my regular clients within about half an hour to an hour or so, but usually just over the half an hour mark per image. I usually tend to work to a minimum of $100 an hour in anything that I'm doing these days, so that tends to make sense for me to charge about $50 per image. I have been working to a per image rate more so lately because I did have an hourly rate that I worked to, which was between $50 and $100 depending on the type of retouching that needed to be done. However, I did find that a lot of clients, especially smaller clients, were really struggling with the ongoing cost of the retouching and not knowing what the final amount was going to be. And a lot of clients really want that final figure of what they're going to be charged. So to avoid this, sometimes I will say to clients up front, if it does take me longer, I will need to invoice for an extra amount. I will be sort of keeping time, but for the most part, if the imagery is pretty simple in terms of the beauty retouching, I'm just working mainly on bits of the skin tone and some color correction, then I will be able to get this done within the mentioned time of around half an hour. So I do prefer using the per image rate at the moment because I find that more often than not, clients seem to be a little bit happier to hear that end final figure. Now, if it's a fashion image that I'm retouching, I usually charge about $30 an image, and that usually encompasses some basic skin retouching, very, very basic, and also some color grading, usually for fashion images, but I do tend to not spend as much time on fashion images overall. And then I'll also charge for product retouching as well. So I usually do charge around $30 for that as well. Depends though, like I said, these rates can vary. I will charge a little bit more if I feel that there's quite a lot of retouching that needs to be done to the images. Or if, for example, I'm coming in as a retoucher for a job and not the photographer as well, and there's quite a lot of retouching that needs to be done on work that is not mine, I will usually charge a bit more for these rates. So these rates are more so for when I'm retouching the images from a job that I've photographed myself. Now, on average, it's really hard to say how many images usually that brands will request of me to retouch, but more often than not, it's over 20 images. So even for a minimum of 20 images, I'll usually be getting an extra $1,000 plus GST onto the amount of my photography day rate. I've also had certain clients that have wanted about 40 images. It really depends. And it's really a way that you can upsell with your clients too if they're wanting a lot more imagery for social media these days, which is usually the case. They don't just want their campaign images for website or in store or anything like that. They usually want social media imagery as well that they can really use over the coming months. So it's a way to really upsell how many images you're going to retouch. And like I said, I've had jobs where I've done 50 images, I've edited 60 before, and it is a nice way to get extra money on top of the shoot that you've done. And now we're going to talk about usage, the thing that really is the bane of my existence when it comes to financials and everything around photography. Usage is quite frustrating these days because you'll find that there's quite a lot of brands that just don't want to pay an extra fee for usage. And unfortunately, these do tend to be a lot of smaller brands, and they might be startups that really just can't afford to put that into their marketing budget. I tend to think that sometimes it's a bit of an excuse, but I can also understand to an extent when they're much smaller brands, because I've had some brands and clients that have been really, really wonderful clients and just been sort of starting out, and they want to have that nice imagery, but unfortunately sometimes usage costs can really blow it out of the water. So I tend to keep them quite minimal for startup brands, and most of the time these brands are only using the images for social media, maybe their website. That's kind of it. So I do tend to keep their usage costs very minimal. However, for larger brands who are going to be having in-store marketing, they're going to have billboards, they're going to have posters, it's really going to depend on what your client is going to be using the images for and for how long, and where the images are going to be shown to. So location-wise, whether it's worldwide, whether it's just here in Australia, that is also going to be really dependent on your usage rates. But more often than not, my usage rate is a minimum of my full day photography rate. So an extra $17.60 on top of my other rates. So that is just for usage. And quite often I would say that that's about 6 months worth of social media advertising and maybe for web in general. But anything more than that, then you start to multiply your day rate a few more times, depending on how many years the client is looking at having it for and where they're wanting to have the images placed as well. So that's something that you do need to consider, and it is something that a lot of photographers do tend to miss out on a lot of money from. I have used usage calculators online. There is a couple of good ones around. However, I will warn that some of them do come up with an ungodly price sometimes that is just way too much for a lot of my clients here in Australia. Maybe if they were Yves Saint Laurent, or maybe if they were L'Oreal, but a lot of the brands that are homegrown here in Australia will usually not want to pay excessive amounts in usage. And it's unfortunately just something I've had to push through in previous years. However, I don't believe that that's not a reason at all to charge usage. And there is definitely that fee that should be added should you come across a brand that wants to use your images, especially in different ways, just other than socials and web. So there are so many variables when it comes to this kind of stuff, and like I said, it goes without saying that this is not necessarily what you should charge. This is going to be dependent on your experience, your location, and what you feel comfortable charging as well to clients who you may be working with. As I said, a lot of my clients tend to be on the smaller side of things, especially startups do tend to have a little bit more of a minimum budget for this kind of thing. However, my mid to larger size clients tend to want to have more in their marketing budgets because they know where these images are going to be used and the fact that they're going to have a much different usage and a much different reach to a larger audience as well. So guys, I really want to hear your thoughts about this down below, and let me know the struggles that you've had when it comes to pricing your photography, because I'm always happy to listen to your point of view when it comes to things like this. I think that it's a really tricky thing to start doing when you're first wanting to start charging, and especially to commercial clients, it can be a little bit overwhelming with how many variables do come into it. But I hope that this video today has just shed a little bit more light on my own situation and shown you potentially that if you do live in Australia, maybe this is a potential for what you can be earning in a few years' time, or even if you're not in Australia or you're living in a different country, hopefully this is just some sort of a benchmark that you can use in some way to help you along with your charging process. But I would definitely not shy away from doing your research when it comes to finding out what other photographers are charging. There's numerous ways that you can do this. Unfortunately, a lot of people, as I've said before, will not want to talk too much about how much they do charge when it comes to their own rates, but it doesn't mean that you still can't kind of try in that aspect. So I hope that this video has been helpful for you in any possible way. All right, guys, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel already, make sure you do. I'll be posting a lot more content like this, where I delve into lots of different topics around retouching and photography. Make sure to leave me a comment down below and let me know what your struggles are when pricing photography. And also go check out my mini ebook, which I've written on the subject, and hopefully that will have some even more helpful information for you. The link is down in the description box below for that. But thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.